The Kennedy victory, in my judgment, was not a question of liberalism. I don't think liberalism had anything to do with it. And I don't think conservatism would have had anything to do with it either. I think there were a number of factors. First of all, and this is an extremely important one, we'd reached a point where it was about time for Catholics to come together and really support a candidate. You know, the famous election in 1928, the one that involved L. Smith, that left kind of a nasty taste in everybody's mouth as time went by. And I think to a certain great extent, I think that Kennedy's Catholicism was an asset rather than a hindrance. I think a lot of people voted for Jack just to prove that they weren't bigots. But then there was another thing. It was time for the World War II generation to take over. If one looks at the history of American politics in this century, one finds that at a certain period following a major war, the people that participated very actively in that war suddenly become the leaders. And I think that's what happened with Kennedy. You see, the people that had participated in World War II, by that time they'd gotten to voting age. Studies, by the way, show that the voting age begins sometime in the 30s, not in the early 20s when people first become eligible to vote. A whole generation that had fought in World War II had reached a point where they were looking around for one of their own. Next, there was Kennedy and his whole family had very great skill at inter-party maneuvering. They were very good at it. And they worked early and they worked hard. He was a master at cultivating certain types of people, especially the intellectuals. I think he was one of the first presidents, even more than Roosevelt. He was one of the first presidents to realize the impact that the intellectuals make in our society. Now, one of the things that had happened was that during World War II, intellectuals were brought into the war effort to a very large extent because there was no place else to go. We were fighting in countries like Southeast Asia, parts of Africa, that is Northern Africa, places like that, where no Americans had ever been before, except a few college professors and a few writers. And in order to have any information on those countries, you had to go to the intellectuals that had been there. Well, they got a taste of power. For the first time, they were out of the ivory towers, and they loved it. And Kennedy really knew how to cultivate that. He was very good at it. A friend of mine once told me about the way things were handled at Harvard University. Of course, he was a graduate of Harvard. But he would invite a few of the professors to a sort of a roundtable session. He'd be very candid. It was all off the record, of course. Very candid, very open, very frank. Then maybe at Christmas time, he'd send them a very tasteful gift. Nothing that looked like a bribe, nothing that could give them a reason to reject it. And then when he actually got into the government, he started putting them in many positions where sometimes I don't think there may have been too much power, but there were certainly some marvelous titles. And what that meant was that he had the teachers of the teachers, so to speak, out carrying the hod for him. And the result is that what you're running into now are many people who remember Kennedy as such a marvelous, beautiful thing. You know, this idea of the White House being Camelot while he was there, that always bothered me a little bit, by the way. If you read Marlowe, you discover that Camelot was a place where everybody was getting drunk every night, changing wives, in Queen Guinevere's bedroom. But that's not the way it looks in the musical comedy, of course.